The word nationalism has taken on for the left this connotation of fueling anti-Semitism, hate, even violence. Do you think that is fair, and do you want to further clarify what nationalism means to you?
To me, I don't have to clarify. It means I love the country. It means I'm fighting for the country. I look at two things, globalists and nationalists. I'm somebody that wants to take care of our country because for many, many years, you know this better than anybody, our leaders have been more worried about the world than they have about the United States, and they leave us in a mess.
Actually, here's the interesting thing. It's not people on the left, Laura, who actually think nationalist means being a racist and being a white nationalist. It's the white nationalists themselves. Yeah. Come on, the left, really? No,
She's a very smart woman.
Duke.
She knows this.
Here's David Duke just this week, and unless I miss something, I don't think he's writing for The Nation. David Duke, after Donald Trump talks about being a nationalist because, again, he's not sending dog whistles anymore. He's just playing the foghorn for him. Trump embraces nationalism in a massive, jam-packed 99.9% white venue in Houston. Zio journalist asked him if this is white nationalism. Of course, fundamentally, it is. As there is no ethnic or racial group in America more nationalist than white Americans. So what's the problem, Katty K? Donald Trump knew this was coming. Donald Trump has been playing to David Duke. He's been playing to Richard Spencer. He's been playing to white nationalists since Charlottesville and even before then. And for some Fox News host to come on and say it's liberals, I know they're not stupid. I know they're smart people. They know this is all about making people like David Duke happy.
Yeah, this is the reason why after Charlottesville, Donald Trump found it so hard to denounce white nationalists vehemently, why he equated those who were protesting against white nationalists with the white nationalists themselves. You said it earlier, this seems to be where he is, and he is surrounded on issues of race, on issues of immigration, by people like Stephen Miller, who have been trying ever since he came into the White House to cut back on the number of immigrants. It's not just, I don't think, a midterm political ploy. This is something that this White House has always looked at, has always been close to. And it's white nationalism. For Europeans, this goes back to the 1930s and the spectre of fascism. Ask George Orwell, and he'll tell you that the difference between patriotism and nationalism was that nationalism came with aggression. Patriotism is just a love of your country. Nationalism is an aggressive doctrine. And I think that when the president chose that word nationalist, he clearly thought about it very hard. And it is wrapped up in these connotations of assertiveness, of aggressiveness, of dominance of one race and one country over another. And it doesn't surprise me at all that at this stage, a week before the election, he's choosing not to back down on that. But I think this is what Donald Trump believes. This is what Stephen Miller believes. This has been in this White House ever since they came into office.
Well, and this is Jeffrey Goldberg, what David Duke and Richard Spencer and white nationalists believe. And certainly it's code language, and it's also, without drawing a direct line there, but it's obviously what alt-righters and neo-Nazis believe, whether they're in Charlottesville or shooting up synagogues in Pittsburgh.
You know, this is not new. I mean, remember, and I'll bring this to Pittsburgh in a second, but remember, in the campaign, Donald Trump deployed the term America First, right? He was told that this kind of terminology is rooted in 1930s anti-Semitic fascist movements, pro-Nazi movements. And then continue to use the language, and then folded in language about globalists, which of course is code. The alt-right knows what it means, nationalists and so on. So this is just a continuation of deliberate policy to activate the fears and signal to not just the alt-right, the racist right, the reactionary right, whatever you want to call it, that, hey, I understand your point, and it all ties. Everything's one thing right now. The caravan is a bunch of brown people moving toward America, 3,000 people moving to a country of 330 million people, but it's activating. And of course, the terrorist in Pittsburgh, who I won't name, was bathing in this, was marinating in all of this anxiety and paranoia. And again, we want to be careful. You blame the shooter for doing the shooting, but there's a climate right now in which I'm just afraid on a personal level that there are more people like this guy in Pittsburgh who are being activated by the same material.
Yeah,
it seems obvious.
It seems it is obvious, and for people to claim that it's not is dangerous. You look at the bombing, Mika, the bomber from Florida. This guy was on social media talking about food until Donald Trump, and then he picked out every one of Donald Trump's enemies that Donald Trump had stirred hatred up against. And let me just say for viewers, when you hear the word globalist coming from Donald Trump, can tell you what David Duke and white supremacists and neo-Nazis think Jews, globalists, international bankers, George Soros. When you see your congressman in your local district talking like that, it is all coded, and it has always been coded as anti-Semitic hate speech. And sure enough, we've seen it unfortunately tragically play out, Mika, over the past week.
Richard Haass, if you could pull it up to 30,000 feet and talk about a global trend that we may or may not be seeing here, or also any parallels you see between this president's rapidly developing behavior in the run-up to these midterms as it pertains to racism and the others and the caravans to other figures that we've seen in history. Is it okay to go there?
Start with your first question. It's happening all over the world. We're seeing it over the weekend in Brazil. The idea that this thug who's anti-democracy,
right,
what he says about gay people, women, his contempt for the rule of law, that he wins the election there. We're seeing it in places like the Philippines. We're seeing it in Turkey. We're seeing it in big parts of Europe. Parts of Europe that were liberated from Soviet control have now become extraordinarily illiberal in one generation. So we're seeing it all over the world. Look, people are anxious. People are uneasy for any number of legitimate reasons, and it's only going to get worse, Mika, as these new technologies come along, from artificial intelligence to robots to autonomous vehicles. Millions of jobs are going to be eliminated, and unless we train a lot of people, they're going to be unemployed for the rest of their lives. So the concerns are real, but what we're now seeing is scapegoating. And we're seeing it blamed on trade. We're seeing it blamed on immigrants. There's all sorts of racial and religious coding here. And there's historical parallels. Any times in history where you have societies understandably anxious over economic issues, you see people using scapegoating and using false explanations for political gain. And all this emphasis on caravans and immigrants a week before the election it historically fits. And this is the sort of thing we thought would never happen in the United States.
In America.
We often talk about it. This is a country founded on an idea, not on race, not on religion, not on identity, but on commitment to an idea about democracy, freedom, opportunity, where you're only judged by your merits, not by skin, religion, or anything like else. This, to me, is profoundly un-American, what we're seeing.
So Jeffrey Goldberg, when you listen to the president in that Fox interview last night, and again when he talks about being a nationalist, it seems to me he confuses being a nationalist with being a patriot, with somebody who loves his country. There is a distinction between those two words. I think at best the president doesn't understand the power of his words, what it means when he says something like that, and at worst he's sending code, he's sending signal and giving cover to people who interpret that, like David Duke, as we saw there, a guy that the president claimed that in February of 2016 he didn't know and never heard of somehow in the United States of America, giving cover to people like David Duke to go about their business.
Right. Ignorance is no defense when you're the president, but ignorance is also implausible here because we've been in this drama for a couple of years now, and people have explained them. People on cable television have explained it to him right through the tube. I mean, maybe people right around him aren't explaining the power of these words, but he certainly knows it. But look, it's an electoral strategy. I mean, it's strategic, and he's going to deploy it. I also, this question, does he feel it or is it cynical? It might be both things. It seems as if he feels this. Look, subtext has become text. What used to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, dog whistles to appeal to the fears of white voters now are just stated openly. I mean, I think back all the time to George W. Bush's first impulse, or one of his first impulses after 9/11, was to immediately go to a mosque in Washington to signal to American Muslims, hey, you're not the enemy. We have a problem, but you're not the enemy. You're with us. That impulse is the impulse that seems to be largely absent from decision making in the White House right now.
I don't think I think we always expected possibly people like this with impulses like this. But I don't think we expected a complicit media arm or a complicit Congress to be part of this, and this is what we're dealing with at this point.
The problem here, Mika, is not only is the media arm complicit, not only is Congress complicit, they are actively engaging in the fear-mongering and the lying and the hatred and the racism.
This is what we didn't expect.
When you talk about the others bringing smallpox to America when it was eradicated, as Willie said, in 1980.
You're not right.
When you're talking about leprosy being brought to the United States by a caravan that is not going to even exist by the time it gets up to the United States if what happened in April happens this time as well. You have members of Congress that are spreading this hatred as well. So no, they are far worse than complicit. Their hands, their fingerprints are all over this lie. They are spreading this racist lie. Think about this. Think about this if you're a stockholder of a certain media company. The stock that you were holding, actually puts you in ownership with a media company that is spreading white nationalist lies. Lies about leprosy, lies about smallpox, lies about the others invading the United States of America.
I would ask advertisers to take a look at where you're putting your money.
Yes.
If you like white nationalism, you can invest in some of these Fox News programs and these Fox News hosts. You can do that. They're there for you.
Because they're talking about smallpox being brought to America. They're talking about leprosy being brought to America. This is not even a close call. We talked about Lou Dobbs spreading conspiracy theories about the bombs being faked. I mean, and the same thing with backbenchers of Congress. If you're contributing to certain backbenchers of Congress, you're giving money to somebody that is actually spreading the big lie. Right now, talking about the others, lying about smallpox, lying about leprosy. No, Mika. I wish they were only complicit. This is far worse than that. Jeffrey Goldberg, thank you so much. Still ahead, President Trump's midterm election ad is missing one thing. President Trump. What it says about his standing with the voters just 1 week from the election as his numbers are plummeting.
And we've got an exciting announcement about our election coverage here on Morning Joe. How you can be part of our studio audience. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back with that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.